and even good night. My name is Francis Cleveland from Xanthus Consulting International. I am the convener of IEC TC 57 Working Group 15 on cybersecurity for power systems. And I'm also the model manager of IEC 61850-7-420 for distributed energy resources. In addition, I'm the secretary of IEEE 1547.3, which is cybersecurity for DER. That's a new standard. Today, I will present on the what and how cybersecurity standards, which are cybersecurity for power systems, including distributed energy resources.
And so now I'm going to discuss cybersecurity for power systems, including IEC 61850, as well as that for distributed energy resources, a new difficult topic. I'm going to start with some background on the what and how cybersecurity standards, and then I will get into some of the what standards for power system. I'm going to touch very briefly on IEC 62443 because I know that that's being covered by others, but I'm going to cover more extensively IEEE 1547.3. Then I'm going to cover one of the how standards for power systems, the main one, which is IEC 62351. So what do I mean by what and how cybersecurity standards? So first I'm going to start with a threat landscape growing as we speak. What do I mean by the threat landscape? It's basically that the use of cyber assets is expanding rapidly in all aspects of power systems. Deliberate malicious threats are now commonplace, even for the power system operations. Inadvertent mistakes, threats like mistakes, equipment failures, natural disasters are growing in frequency and effect. This has become very clear recently with some of the major storms that we've had. And we need a holistic approach. Both deliberate and inadvertent threats are both damaging and often indistinguishable. So we really need to address them as a whole. We can't just separate out cyber threats as being somehow separate from these other inadvertent type threats. In addition, we need both engineering strategies and cyber techniques to address these threats. And we need to use IT as well as OT methods to detect and limit the impact of these attacks. And it's not just a question of technology. We need to have policies, security procedures, and only then can we really look at the security technologies. And we need to utilize cybersecurity standards, both the what standards, what are you supposed to do, and the how standards, how are you actually going to do it? It's, I think, really important to recognize that encryption by itself is not the solution. You can encrypt malware, and it still is malware. Resilience to these attacks and these threats is the ultimate requirement, since prevention is impossible. I don't have time at this presentation to go through all of the issues of security organization and security procedures, because I'm going to focus primarily on security technologies. But it's quite clear that we need to take a look at all, maybe held together by some kind of risk assessment that determines what of each of these that we need. So what do I mean by what and how cybersecurity standards? This diagram here is a bit of an eye chart, but I'm hoping that people can use it in general and in the future to see what I mean. So the what standards are the ones that your organization should be doing. It addresses many of the issues that need to be taken into account. The technical standards are the ones that say, how are you going to do it? How are you actually going to achieve the security that you're looking for from the what standards? And then the third aspect, which again I don't have time to go into this time, is the process towards compliance. We need to have cybersecurity testing, compliance testing, and maturity models, and a lot of work in that area as well. One of the more important what standards is really the NIST cybersecurity framework, with the idea of improving resilience. Again, as I said, resilience is really the key, not prevention. And as you can see, the NIST framework includes starting with identify. You need to know what systems you have, what cyber systems, what other kinds of assets you have, what their capabilities are. If you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. The second area is the protection. Develop and implement the appropriate safeguards to ensure delivery of critical infrastructure services. That's how NIST states it, but it can go beyond that. How are you going to make it safe as well as secure? So it's important to have these protections, but in order to have resilience, which is the overall goal, you need to be able to detect problematic activities, whether they're deliberate attacks or just inadvertent problems. And then you have to develop the appropriate ways of responding to any kind of attack. Again, whether it's a mistake or equipment failure or an actual cyber attack. We have to know ahead of time how to respond to it. You can't just shut everything down. And the final aspect is recovery. Okay, you've coped with the situation as it was occurring. Now you need to understand how best to recover, to get back to where you were and possibly improve your situations as a result of this particular attack. So as I mentioned, the NIST cybersecurity framework starts with identify, which means how are you going to manage your assets? And first, know your assets. Also, the understanding that there will always be successful attacks. Again, whether they're deliberate attacks or inadvertent failures, etc. The question is how to minimize the impact of those attacks. And risk assessment is really the first step towards that. And you've got to identify the possible threats and the vulnerabilities of your systems. And not only the individual systems, but the interactions across multiple assets. This is really an important part of it. Then you need to assess the probability of a successful attack and estimate the impacts of a successful attack. And then the risk is the probability times the impact, while risk management needs to include the cost of risk mitigation balanced against the possible impact. After identify, we come to protect, which is actually what most people think about when they're doing cybersecurity. And you need to design in the security measures from the beginning as much as possible, recognizing that, of course, they're legacy systems. But if you can design it in from the beginning, it's much more likely to be holistic and protect everything that you need. You should use both IT and OT measures, sensors on power equipment and on IT equipment, data collection from both OT and IT systems, data assessment for anomalies, data validation to identify possible accuracy or integrity issues, equipment and communications redundancy. Really important, the redundancy. It's not just a power system redundancy, it's cyber asset redundancy to provide alternate communication paths, alternate sources of data. You should focus on access control, including firewalls and gateways and secured databases, as well as use role-based access control. Really important, again, to permit only authenticated and authorized access. This is for humans as well as for, let's say, applications or other systems. They should all be authenticated and authorized. And then it should be specifying and implementing the monitoring capabilities, alarm and event logging, audit trails, etc., for post-event assessment. Detection of events. But the key is to organize the security monitoring. Lots of events occur all of the time, but most are irrelevant to cybersecurity. Mistyped passwords 3 times, voltage sag due to a generator tripping. Yeah, that's a power system problem, but it's not a cybersecurity problem itself. Cascade of residential outages reported due to a storm. However, some events are definitely cybersecurity related. A mistyped password 100 times? Yeah, now you need to take a look at it. Voltage sag reported from one equipment, but not verified by other equipment. Somehow some equipment tampering or communication tampering. Outages reported in one area that are not related to the storm. Information tampering, possibly. So detecting cybersecurity events is more than just monitoring and getting in scads and scads of data. It's really that the events and the monitored information must be organized and prioritized by type and severity. And events across systems must be evaluated to detect anomalies. So the last 2 areas are respond and recover. Basically, plan ahead. Unlike most IT systems, operational systems really cannot be shut down, if at all possible. So planning needs to take place ahead of time for all types of scenarios. Planning for coping during a cyber attack, as well as planning for recovering from a cyber attack. Many of the plans may be the same as for power system equipment failures, but taking into account maybe the cyber aspects of the whole power system. Remembering that resilience is the goal, not necessarily full operationalization. So it can be seen that electric power companies definitely have security challenges, but there's some additional security challenges for distributed energy resources. There are a bunch of more vulnerabilities. They're not located in very safe sites. They can be homes, they can be office buildings, there can be campuses. They're not usually owned by the utility, so any of the security policies and procedures may not apply. And very often, those that own the DERs do not have any cybersecurity expertise. They can be just typical homeowners or university campuses and so forth. And cybersecurity is probably one of the lowest things in their estimation on their minds. So, and another really important factor is that DERs involve many different stakeholders, raising the real question of who is responsible for what under which circumstances. This is a critical, important problem. So there really need to be additional security measures for DER. Most of them still apply: access control, data protection, supply chain, etc. But it relies more and more on the manufacturers and implementers to develop and deliver the strongly secured systems without expecting much local cybersecurity expertise. And there need to be cross-organizational agreements on what security measures should be implemented. Who is responsible for what? How should the issues be resolved? This is a critical part that is somewhat true for the rest of the power system, but with DER systems, it's a problem in spades. So now I'm going to discuss the what cybersecurity standards, what needs to be done. I recognize that IEC 62443 is a very important what standard, but others have discussed that. So what I'm going to do is focus on IEEE 1547.3, which is cybersecurity for distributed energy resources. So I'm not going to say much about IEC 62443, except for one important feature, which is that it is now being updated to become more focused on the energy sector as well as other automation sectors for cyber physical systems. So it is no longer just purely the industrial automation. IEEE P 1547.3 is the Guide for Cybersecurity for Distributed Energy Resources. It's expected to be balloted soon and hopefully will be out maybe sometime next year. We'll have to wait and see. Its focus is really on the distributed energy resources that are in the main 1547 2018 interoperability requirements, but we've quickly recognized that we really needed to address the holistic and end-to-end requirements for cybersecurity. You cannot just have cybersecurity in one little slice of a system. You have to have it end-to-end. We also recognize that there are many different stakeholders in the DER world: utilities, DER owner-operators, the aggregators, the DER manufacturers, the DER implementers. And each one of those stakeholders really has a different set of requirements that they need to do in order to have the DER system secure. And we also recognize that DER cybersecurity must include all DER-related systems and the networks and the equipment, so the power equipment as well as the cyber assets that belong to the different stakeholders. So just to emphasize again, the scope of the IEEE 1547 for DER is functional in scope, and it really just can affect this small area. But for cybersecurity, we absolutely need to have the whole system involved in developing the cybersecurity requirements. So we understand that 1547 itself has a very narrow scope, but the 1547.3 has a much, much broader scope. And as I mentioned, we thought it was very important to have recommendations for the different DER stakeholders. I'm not going to go through all of these items here. You can take a look at them at your leisure. But I think it's really important to recognize that there are many different stakeholders. They belong to different organizations. They may have different rules, different cybersecurity requirements, different ways of interacting with each other. So unlike a utility where most of it is under one roof and one set of security policies and procedures, for DERs, it is a much more complex and convoluted set of interactions. This slide looks rather complicated in the beginning, but it really shows the DER stakeholders and the DER architecture that is so important to understand if you're going to do adequate cybersecurity. So just starting at the bottom here, the DER systems themselves are in level 1 in the green, right here. The plants, buildings that the DER systems are in are the facilities of varying sorts, are blue. They can also be plant level, so there can be a plant that manages the whole of the DER systems. Then the third is the aggregators that are in red, so level 3 is the aggregators. The fourth is the utilities. And here's the distribution utility. This is the transmission utility. And above at the top are the purple markets. It's important to recognize that these actors, these stakeholders, all have very different roles to play, and there are many different interactions cutting across all of them. This makes the cybersecurity particularly challenging. So one of the ways to handle this complexity is the use of gateways between the various stakeholders. Very importantly, between the utility systems here, again in the yellow, and you have a utility gateway that has many security services, including ones with demilitarized zone, firewalls, data access control, the cloud, and contractual agreements are very important. And as you can see in this diagram, the aggregators also have gateways and security services in the gateways, as do the facilities themselves. Now, this is conceptual. We're not talking about where physically these gateways might be. They might be at the utility site. They could be at the aggregator or the facility site. But the point is that with the use of gateways, you have much more control over the cybersecurity between the stakeholders. This is definitely an eye chart. I don't expect you to even be able to read it except on your own. But I wanted to point out that IEEE 1547.3 does include a comparison of the security capabilities and mechanisms that are available for the different DER protocols. In addition, we have the cybersecurity recommendations, which are quite similar, in fact, to the IEC 62443-3-3 requirements in terms of their scope, except that we do have some additional things like risk assessment across organizations, risk management across organizations, and many of these items, although they may be very familiar with respect to 62443-3-3, also pick up on the different aspects that are specific to the multitude of DER stakeholders. So now we've created another what standard. We've got a lot of standards that say what you ought to be doing. The problem is that there are too many of them in reality. But one of the things that we've tried to do is we took the NIST cybersecurity framework and made role-specific requirements, detailed them, and a crosswalk, which means we showed references to the different security standards that are applicable for each of the NIST items. So now I'm going to get into the how cybersecurity standards, in particular IEC 62351. So one way of looking at the IEC 62351 set of standards is to show how it applies across all of the different areas of utility or electric power systems. This includes, of course, the utility itself. It includes the substations. It includes links to other utilities and other substations. It goes to generators such as the turbine electric systems and the hydro systems, and it also addresses the DER as well. So it does cover the full scope of 62351 and the 61850 areas. Another way of looking at the 62351 standards is to actually look at each one of them and how they work in conjunction with the communication standards. So you see over here on the left, you see the communication standards, you see ICCP, you see DNP3 or the 101, 104, here's 101, and here's DNP3 serial. Here's 61850 8-1, the client server protocol. Here's the 61850 8-1 goose and sampled values, as well as the newer 61850 8-2, which is MMS over XMPP. And finally, we have SIM, the Common Information Model. As you can see, there's not a one-to-one mapping to the 62351 standards, but it's because we reuse, for instance, the transport level, which is TCP/IP, and we add TLS. In addition, we have a number of standards that really apply to all the different areas. And then down here we have some guidelines and some technical reports. And over here on the left we have the conformance testing. We have a number of these done, but most of them are still in progress as we speak. So starting with the first of the technical standards, we have the 62351-3, which is transport layer security. Basically, we're using TLS between communication nodes. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So what we're doing is really specifying the use of TLS. And these are the different threats that it can counter. The man in the middle of threat, tamper detection, masquerading, pretending to be somebody else, theft and eavesdropping, spoofing and replay. So we use part 3 in conjunction with the other parts because this provides the transport layer and the others provide the application layers. So 62351 part 4 is the application layer for security for profiles using MMS and similar payloads. So this is basically the 61850 protocols. And one of the things that we've tried to make sure is that there is a choice of security levels. We know that not every single implementation would like to have all of the different total types of security. But we have, in combination with part 3, we can do security without encryption. We can do security without encryption, but with level 3 TLS. We can do security with encryption just at the application level, and we can do security with encryption at the application level and at the transport level. So it provides a choice depending upon the scenarios and the way the system is built. So 62351 part 6 is security for the 61850 peer-to-peer profiles, namely goose and sampled values. So it provides the authentication mechanisms for the peer-to-peer multicast datagrams that are not routable and therefore have very stringent time latency requirements. So we recognize that not all implementations want to have encryption. So if you don't use encryption, then you can at least get identification of unauthorized modification of information. However, if encryption can be employed, then we can do more through message level authentication and modification, tampering, or even theft of information. In addition to the protocol security that I was just describing, we also determined that we really needed to address network and system management, because two network infrastructures must be managed, not just one. So both the power system infrastructure and the information infrastructure must be monitored, analyzed, and controlled. What we do is we use SNMP MIBs for the networks. We may use 61850 in the future, but for right now we're sticking with the SNMP MIBs. So one of the most important standards that we have worked on is the role-based access control, RBAC. It's absolutely critical that access to any information should be not only authenticated, that you are who you say you are, or the system is what it says it is, but that you are authorized to actually get hold of the data, or to issue control commands, or to monitor what's happening. This is absolutely critical nowadays. So what we have with RBAC is that roles are given very specific permissions. These permissions can be at different levels: yes, no access to the entire device, or access to read selected types of device, or access to issue controls. This is really critical. And we've also included that roles can be constrained by area, by location, or by time. And permissions may be constrained by the state of the device or the state of the power system, emergency, for instance. And finally, in the 62351 series, although this is not the end of the story, but it's the last one I'm going to talk about today, is cryptographic key management. Key management is really critical for all aspects of cryptography. You need to enroll devices from their birth. When the manufacturer develops them or creates them, they have to have an identity so that they can be followed throughout their life cycle, including for supply chain issues, including for authorization to do some kind of access. Key management also involves creating cryptographic keys and deriving session keys, etc. And one of the most important ones we just pick up. We're not inventing something new. We're using public key infrastructure, PKI, and we rely on certificate authorities, including certificate revocation lists, as well as OCSP and some of the other ways of managing the cryptography. Thank you very much for listening to this, and I hope you have some questions for later on.
And now, as you can see, cybersecurity is a complex topic. The deliberate and inadvertent threats to power systems are continuously evolving. We are all running as fast as we can just to try to stay even with those threats, or at least just a few steps behind. The what cybersecurity standards can assist by identifying the main issues to address, and can point to the how standards for technologies. But each system and situation is different, so there is no magic solution. We just have to keep running.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video insightful and enjoyable. We post new smart grid related videos every Friday at 12 CET, so please go ahead and subscribe and let colleagues in other departments and peers in other organizations know so that they can benefit too. We welcome your feedback, so if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post them below. Thanks again and have a great day.